Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. This is now the third podcast where this is being done on video as well. Before I talk a little bit about that, I will quickly introduce my co-host, Chris Fenton. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam.
And Jake Nelson, welcome back.
Hello, Adam. We're literally and hopefully figuratively on the same side now.
We are on the same side. So this is now our third episode. The first time we watched it back, I realised I've been slumping forward a bit. So I will talk about you two in a bit, but I realised I was slumping forward. So I'm trying to lean back a bit more now. This is a lot professional.
We need to get them to give us chairs with a higher back so we can actually lean back.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the first thing. I'm a bit concerned that the camera has added some pounds to me. So the worry is that I've actually got unhealthier, which could be the case.
No, you're fit and healthy, but black is slimming. So
that's
next week we should all be in black.
Yes.
Yeah.
But some kind of guys in black, like the dudes in black. There's probably like a pithier.
Yes. Yeah.
The fellas in black.
Yes, I don't know what it could be.
No.
But if you do know, adam.thorne@momentummedia.com.au. Right, now we've got a lot of big, important news stories this week. But there was one story, Jake, that for me was the biggest moment of the week. Jake, talk us through this for all the Av geeks that may have missed it.
Yeah, so as you are doubtless aware, Taylor Swift is coming to Australia in February.
I would never have thought.
Yeah, no, this is the first I've heard of it, to be honest. And for those fans, for the Swifties over in New Zealand, they have been snubbed. Taylor is not going to New Zealand. But Air New Zealand has come to the rescue. It has added 2,000 more Trans-Tasman seats specifically to allow Kiwis to fly to Taylor Swift concerts in Australia, so in Sydney and Melbourne, in February. Extra return flights from Wellington, Christchurch and Auckland to Sydney and Melbourne in February. There's also more seats being added on existing flights to cope with this anticipated surge in demand for the Eras tour, which is a new tour.
So just to recap, Taylor Swift has taken the decision not to play in New Zealand, but Air New Zealand have put on flights so that the Kiwis can come to Australia and see her. That's like specifically not inviting somebody to a party because you don't like them, and they just find a way to turn up anyway.
Yeah, true. And I look, it's sad that Tay-Tay, as she's affectionately known. I don't know her personally. And
no.
I don't consider her a friend.
I consider her a friend, Chris.
Do you? Okay, fair call. It's upsetting that Taylor Swift has decided to skip New Zealand on this tour. There's obviously a lot of Swifties over in New Zealand that obviously would like to see her, and they're making that known by jumping on a jet plane and jetting across the ditch.
But if I was a Kiwi, I would feel dumped and hurt by that decision.
So you're saying that there would be bad blood, Adam?
Yes. Now, there are more puns coming. But for me, it's like she's rejected them, but like a kind of clingy ex, they can't take it, and they're going to get involved anyway.
I don't know. It's Taylor Swift. Would you pay for a ticket to a concert?
She's not very good, is she?
Well, some of these flights are going to have the call sign NZ1989 as an Easter egg for Swifties.
Oh,
there's apparently this Tasman sale that Air New Zealand was having on the final day. More than 3,500 New Zealanders booked flights coinciding with the concert dates. So you have to imagine that Air New Zealand is looking at Taylor Swift and going, "Look what you made us do," and Taylor's going, "Don't blame me."
Are those Taylor Swift songs?
Yeah, they are.
Oh yeah, I'm genuinely not familiar with her work.
Hey, Kiwis, you're welcome in Australia. You belong with us.
Kia ora.
Right, we need to move on because I don't understand any of these.
Summer.
Yeah, I don't understand any of these references. And
you
also,
knew I was trouble, Adam.
Massively outside. I mean, it's barely within the remit of the show, right? So the biggest story this week was this kind of hoo-ha. I don't know if I can use the word hoo-ha. With Air Services, which is the organisation that runs air traffic control, and whether or not they are or are not understaffed. Jake, you've been covering this. Talk us through this saga from the beginning.
Yeah, so Air Services has been having a bit of trouble for a while now. Last week, there was all sorts of palaver about airspace in southeast Queensland and in New South Wales being shut down because of what Air Services said was unplanned leave on the part of air traffic controllers. The union Civil Air has come back swinging. Civil Air is saying Air Services has been engaged. It's been causing this constant reliance on overtime. According to Civil Air, they say that Air Services does not have enough staff. Air Services insists that it has more than enough staff, but Civil Air is saying this is not the case. Civil Air has pointed out that in July 2021, there was this retirement incentive scheme offered to air traffic services staff. 138 employees took up the offer, at least 124 of whom were operational air traffic controllers. So in their statement, the union said this removed maybe 13.7% of Australia's air traffic controllers from rosters. And so they're saying that all this personal leave that the ATCs are taking is a result of removing workforce resilience, as well as traffic picking up earlier than expected, and this constant requirement for overtime.
One of the interesting things about this is there's a lot of I would argue, PR mumbo jumbo, a lot of smoke and mirrors here. So what's happening is that the airspace is being effectively, which is a crucial word, shut down. And so what that means is essentially the aircraft are talking to one another to make sure we don't crash into each other, rather than the person in the air crash control tower giving them that kind of third-party information. And obviously, services can still operate, but it can cause delays. It can potentially cause cancellations because it's not the normal way of doing things. Now, Air Services are very adamant this is toward to, as Jake said, kind of short-term and unplanned leave. But it is not in any way due to an underlying lack of controllers. They say they have more than enough controllers to run their network. And I think off the top of my head, they're claiming that they need 800 to operate Australians' airspaces correctly, and they have 900. But in a sense, what they're saying is this problem is not due to a lack of controllers, it's due to a lack of controllers. Like, it's nonsense, because what they're saying, no, Jake, the rant is still continuing. It's still continuing.
Go ahead.
Right? What they're basically saying is these short-term one-off incidents, but obviously if they had more staff in the first place, then they would have staff to cover this problem. Am I right, Jake?
Yeah, so you are correct. In the number of air services, in the number of ATCs air services claiming, they are saying we need, this was from an official sort of statement by a spokesperson, they are saying they only need about 800 ATCs to fully staff the network. They have more than 900, and they say 97% of these are in operational roles. They are also saying, Air Services, that they're recruiting more than 50 ATC trainees nationwide over the next 3 months to add further depth to their rosters, and a total of 80 air traffic controllers are due in financial year 2024. Civil Air is saying this unplanned leave is not the problem, and that Air Services is shifting blame away from, quote, its lack of workplace planning and resource allocation. The union saying the airlines have failed to admit their own staff reductions have led to outages and industrial action that affect their services. Further, it is relevant to note that ATCs have a regulatory requirement not to work unless medically fit for duty. Data obtained by Civil Air, going on, demonstrates a very clear shortfall in the number of required staff, with recorded overtime hours far exceeding the number of hours lost to unplanned leave. Covering unfilled shifts requires our members to work overtime and thus reduces the number of available staff to cover any subsequent personal leave taken. That is what Civil Air has said.
Chris?
Look, it's interesting, and I think it's pretty evident that Air Services are understaffed and underperforming. We've kind of seen it come out of the wash a bit more this week, with airlines starting to shift blame to Air Services rather than the cancellations being on the airlines. And I know that earlier this week we posted a story on the Australian Aviation page on our social channels about the runway delays at Sydney the other day, when Sydney went down to one runway. Now, we had a number of pilots comment on that story saying, what wins? So Sydney Airport supposedly went down to one runway because of strong winds affecting Sydney. Now, where I was that day, there wasn't a gust of wind in sight. So it was interesting to read that Sydney Airport went down to one runway operation due to high winds. A number of pilots, though, commented on our story that we posted on social media saying, what winds? And one of them actually gave the wind speed when he landed 30 minutes before, saying it was a 14-knot crosswind. Now, that's not a high enough wind to force Sydney Airport into single runway operation, causing absolute gridlock and chaos. And supposedly, wind has shut the runway further as the weeks progress, just causing more chaos for holiday travellers. So there's clearly a problem. No one wants to admit there's a problem. Some of the airlines have come out and said, yes, we have a staffing issue, but we're working on that. But I don't think this time round the airlines are to blame for a staffing issue. I think there's a bigger problem here that we certainly need to rectify and fix.
Well, on that note, and we've had a lot of stories in the last week about staffing shortages, which all kind of blend in and affect one another. Okay, so welcome back. So one of the biggest themes this week in a lot of the stories that we've covered is this kind of ongoing effect of a talent shortage, the ongoing effect of staff shortages, and everything kind of affects everything else. We've had both Bonza and Rex talk loudly about this this week. Jake, tell us a little bit more about what's happening with Bonza and how the talent shortage is affecting them.
Yeah, so Bonza has, come out and said that There's been quite a few cancellations. Its cancellation rate, says its Chief Commercial Officer Carly Povey, is too high. It's apparently cancelled around 4% of its flights since January, and has cancelled at least 7 future flights. Now it is letting the passengers know well in advance. According to the ACCC's June report, though, this is actually its cancellation rate for April was around 0.5%, which is the lowest of all the airlines measured. This is well below the worst offender. I'm sure you can guess who the worst offender was, at about 8%. Not naming names, Jetstar, but so. Compared to other airlines, this situation is relatively minor for Bonza. But the issue that Bonza is facing is it covers all these destinations that bigger airlines don't cover. That's its whole model, or it covers all these routes that bigger airlines don't cover. That's the whole reason to be for Bonza. And so if your flight gets cancelled from Sydney to Melbourne, no big deal. There'll be another one along in 15 minutes or whatever. But if your flight gets cancelled from Mackay to the Sunshine Coast, you're going to have a lot tougher time getting to the Sunshine Coast if the Sunshine Coast is where you especially need to be.
I feel very sorry for Bonza here because, like Jake said, they're in this unique position where they're a new airline, they're a small airline, and they run these low-frequency routes, which means they'll only fly once or twice a week somewhere. So if your flight does get cancelled or delayed, you're in a spot of bother. You're in a lot more trouble than you would be elsewhere, but it's kind of not necessarily their fault. But this underlying talent shortage particularly hurts smaller operators because if you're short of pilots or if you're short of engineers, then there's always the worry that a bigger, richer competitor could come out and pinch them or offer them a better deal. But when you are that small fish in the pond, you're particularly vulnerable. But we are now, what's it been? So in New South Wales, the kind of proper lockdowns ended in September, October 2021. Mm-hmm. So we're coming up now from 2 years from the bulk of the restrictions being lifted. We still have this problem with talent crisis. We still have this issue. When we went to Aviation Australia, did an open day in Brisbane, and we spoke about this before, one of the things we kept hearing over and over again from all the different organisations are we are struggling to find good people. True.
And it makes you wonder why we as an industry are now struggling. It's a number of things. We're not paying enough compared to offshore carriers. We're not offering enough compared to offshore carriers. Further to that, people who were in the industry for years and years and years and too scared to take the leap of faith leaving the industry COVID hit, forced out of the industry, have realised that there's a life outside of aviation and that they can hold a regular Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 job and earn good money.
Wait, there's a life outside of aviation?
Yeah, you can't say that on the show. That's no.
Well,
our commenters are going to string us up.
Apparently, there is a life outside of aviation.
Not a life I want to live.
Not a life I want to live either, but aviation's a tough gig. There's shift work, there's weekend work, there's time away from families. I lost count of the number of Christmases and birthdays and family events that I couldn't make because I was flying. You don't really have a social life. Your family, your chosen family, become your aviation colleagues. So it's tough to attract people into that.
Now, the argument would be, and this is not necessarily just an aviation argument, but particularly in the aviation industry, is the whole reason we had JobKeeper was to stop this very situation happening.
Absolutely
the whole
right.
reason we had JobKeeper was to allow all these organisations the confidence to keep on their employees. And so the argument, well, there's two sides of a story here, but the argument would go that airlines in particular let far too many people go. They took permanent redundancy because they were like, well, we have no idea how the recovery is going to be. And that when things picked up, they actually picked up quicker than expected. And now everyone has found themselves falling short. And it's not an easy situation to rectify because these especially skilled people, which one are hard to find, but secondly take a lot of time to train up. And it's not just going through your regular training. It is getting, as Alan Joyce, to paraphrase Alan Joyce would say, getting match fit. Those
Correct.
little bits of experience that take years to learn, suddenly you've lost them. And so we've emerged in a situation which we're very hard to rectify. Now,
Bonza has said that the issues with the pilot shortage are around its training program. So this is Carly Povey, the chief commercial officer, said there's been a delay in in-flight pilot training due to the knock-on impact of a number of maintenance issues, in particular bird strikes. This left 2 aircraft, and Bonza does not have a lot of aircraft to begin with. 2 aircraft were left unusable and on ground for what she said was a significant number of days. And she says, quote, clearly training is dependent on flying. Sadly, there is a direct correlation between the two issues. This has led to regrettable cancellation for customers.
Now, what I would say about that, and we do try to be quite impartial, but that statement by Bonza and the way they've approached this has been very good, very candid, very honest. They're not trying to play any kind of PR games, but it just is an underlying issue that the whole industry is grappling with.
And another one thing to consider as well, Bonza is using the 737 MAX. It is a new aircraft type to Australia. Virgin only got their first one last week. Bonza was the first Australian airline to bring in the 737 MAX. You've got to train people up on it, in particular, and that's what Virgin's doing with Monkey Maya. I have remembered. That's what Virgin is doing with Monkey Maya VH8IA, their first 737 MAX. They're flying it domestically for a little while to familiarize the crews with the plane, as well as to obtain regulatory approval. So this training issue is probably compounded by the fact that it is, to most Australian pilots, a completely new aircraft. Well, it's a 737, but a new kind of 737.
Now, I should say, just to wrap this up, in our next print edition, which we'll be polishing up in the next 4 or 5 weeks, will be coming out in about 6-7 weeks' time. We're going to write a thick feature looking at this in detail that Jake is going to write. So
I am?
You are. We have spoken about this. Yeah.
Damn it!
This is how you get them when they can't say no on the show. So if you are listening and you have something to contribute, if this has directly affected you, if you have some insight, or if you just want to get in touch, email jake.nelson@momentummedia.com.au. That's also the general email for any complaints and queries you may have about Australian aviation. Make sure they all get funneled to Jake. Remember, I will take all the credit when things go well, but when things go wrong, Jake is your man.
I thought the avenue for any and all complaints about Australian aviation was our Facebook comments.
No, because I have to look at some of them. Some of them are outrageous. Okay, welcome back. So one of the biggest stories this week that Chris touched upon earlier was this kind of perfect storm, or maybe not storm, that we had. New South Wales were going into their school holidays as we record this. I think they officially started on the Monday, but obviously a lot of travel would have begun the weekend before and the Friday before, and just as that happened. We had Sydney had to stop their parallel parallel runway operations and switch to a single runway. And this obviously would normally cause delays and cancellations, but it happened at the absolute worst time. Now, air services, as Chris alluded to earlier, were very, very quick off the mark to say this is absolutely in no way due to staff shortages. This is purely a result of the wind, but nonetheless, it caused absolute chaos because this started off on the Friday. It rolled, their single runway operations rolled into Saturday morning. But obviously, if you have problems in an airport as big as Sydney, this affects lots of the airports around the country. And of course, it means the knock-on effects go on for a long time. So even getting into Monday morning, we were still seeing the result of some of this. It would have brought back very bad memories of what we were seeing this time last year, where the whole industry was falling apart due to particularly staff shortages, new people joining, etc., etc. But what this does show, and this is not necessarily Sydney Airport's fault, but Sydney Airport is both full to bursting and struggles to cope with anything like this. So as we record this on the Tuesday, we've had, I say bad weather for Sydney, but we've had fog and rain this morning, which has caused delays and cancellations.
Good weather for Melbourne.
Good, exactly, yes. That's wiped out a third of our audience, isn't it? Yeah. But it does feel that there's problem after problem for people travelling this week.
Look, and I think it kind of highlights the need for a second Sydney airport with new and advanced technology. Western Sydney Airport have come out and said that its latest runway technology will allow flights to land in the densest and thickest of fog.
That shouldn't be new technology, by the way.
It shouldn't be new technology. No, it shouldn't. But it's clear that, I guess, Sydney Airport, it's time to move into the 21st century and upgrade your systems and make the facility better. And
there may also be some relief forthcoming when Newcastle has finished its upgrades, because Newcastle Airport is as I'm sure our listeners are aware, undergoing a big overhaul of its runway and its sort of terminals and such to accommodate bigger international flights.
Yep.
The extraordinary thing about how it works here in New South Wales is it's kind of Sydney Airport or bust, and that may not be the case for soon. But it's kind of Sydney Airport or bust. We're obviously in Queensland. They've got Brisbane with its new second runway, and of course you've got the Gold Coast as well,
and Sunshine Coast,
Coast as well. Of course with Bonza, and of course if you go down to Victoria, you've got Avalon providing a bit of extra capacity in addition to Tullamarine.
I remember back when I was cabin crew, the number of times. There's one particular flight that I remember very clearly where it was a Sydney Gold Coast flight, and during our flight up to the Gold Coast, bad weather had moved in, and we came in for a landing. The captain had pre-warned us and the passengers that weather had moved in and we would attempt a landing, and if he couldn't get in, we'd circle around and see what we could do. And we had 2 missed approaches, and the captain decided that was enough and it was time to divert to Brisbane. So 15 minutes further of flying, we landed in Brisbane. There are plenty of times where I was due to land in Tullamarine and we couldn't land in Tullamarine, so off to Avalon we went. So as you've highlighted quite well there, Adam, is Sydney doesn't have a backup option.
Sorry, did you say 15 minutes further of flying?
Yeah, from the Gold Coast to Brizzy.
Okay. No, because I was thinking I got the direction mixed up and thought it was Sydney to Brisbane. I'm like, damn, that's a fast plane.
It is extraordinary though that New South Wales managed to get themselves into this situation, and this is a decades-long problem. That this is and this does feel, and I don't want to sound like another whinging Pom, but it just feels that the whole state has a major issue. Jeez, there's a major issue here with infrastructure generally. I don't have enough of it. It doesn't go anywhere. It is a recurring theme, isn't it?
It's very much a recurring theme. And look, I love Sydney Airport. It was my home for many years when I was cabin crew. I earned my wings at Sydney Airport. I grew up at Sydney Airport. I live not far from the airport. There's a fantastic television show at the moment. I'll give a plug to a great TV show on SBS on demand at the moment, Inside Sydney Airport. It airs every Thursday night, and I'm glued to it every Thursday night. That's what you'll find me watching, which really gives an inside look into Sydney Airport. So shout out to the team at Sydney Airport that do a fantastic job day in, day out. to the management of Sydney Airport, I think it's high time they lift their game.
But of course, there is another airport that could be a potential option. Did you guys know that they have an airport in Canberra?
This is a great link. I've heard there is an airport in Canberra.
There is an airport, as Kooyong
international
MP,
airport.
as Kooyong MP Monique Ryan will no doubt attest. There is an airport in Canberra, and you can fly there business class from Melbourne. Apparently,
is there a story related to that link that we could possibly talk about, Jake?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, no, hang on. Sorry. No, you're right. There is a story about that. It's not one that we covered, but it did pop up in places like the Sydney Morning Herald, which is that Monique Ryan, the Teal independent from Kooyong, formerly the seat of ex-treasurer Josh Frydenberg, has apparently billed taxpayers for 27 business class flights during her first year in office. That's about $28,000 worth of air travel, mostly on Melbourne to Canberra, which is like an hour. What can you get in business class from Melbourne to Canberra that you cannot get in economy?
Well, I haven't been on
a nicer meal.
I was going to say, I've not been on a domestic business class in quite a while, shamefully. But I know a man that has recently been upgraded to business on a domestic flight.
Yeah, so lounge access, extra luggage allowance. But being a politician, chances are she'd have a higher tiered frequent flyer membership anyway, which would give her all the perks of a business class, just without the seat. Look, I honestly believe there's no reason why our politicians on a domestic flight at the taxpayer's expense should be flying business class.
Yeah, use your frequent flyer miles.
Use your miles or sit down the back. Suck it up, princess.
Wow. We're going to move on there before we get into all sorts of trouble. What else are we going to talk about this week? Yes, I'll tell you what we're going to talk about just to wrap things up. Rex, friend of the show, but known as a combative airline. They've been in, and I love this Australian word, a stoosh. We never have a stoosh in the UK.
I believe it's stoush.
It's a stoush. It's a stoush.
Down here.
Stoush. Silly word, but you get what I mean. They've had a row. They've had a hoo-ha, an ongoing hoo-ha regarding them pulling out of Whyalla due to passing on screening costs. They have this week, Rex have this week celebrated Armadale Airport that has kind of found a way around this. I've probably botched the explanation, but Jake, tell us the latest on this stoush.
Yeah, so background to the stoush. Rex has pulled out of Whyalla because at the start of the month, the federal government basically pulled its subsidy for security screening at regional airports. So Whyalla made the decision, Whyalla Council, which runs the Whyalla Airport, made the decision to pass on the increased costs of security screening to the airlines and sort of by extension the passengers. Rex did not like that. Rex said, no, our planes have less than 40 seats that we fly into Whyalla. If you fly a plane with less than 40 seats, it does not need to be screened. Why are you charging us for screening instead of doing some renovations to have a screened gate for Qantas and an unscreened gate for the rest of us? And so Rex has pulled out of Whyalla. Qantas has stepped in to fill the gap that Rex has left in Whyalla. Rex has not liked that. But one thing that Rex has done is they've highly praised Armadale for doing what Rex has suggested was to be done in Whyalla. Armadale Regional Airport, which is in the New South Wales Northern Tablelands, has implemented this unscreened gate that will serve Rex and Link. So Rex and Link Airways flights can go through this unscreened gate and not have to deal with the costs of security screening, whereas customers for any Qantas flights into Armadale will still need to be screened. So Rex has said this is an enlightened approach from Armadale.
Great word. I love that.
Enlightened approach. David Brooksby, the National Airports Manager at Rex, said, quote, "This is the only way to ensure that passengers of airlines like Rex do not need to pay an additional charge to subsidise the screening cost of airlines using larger aircraft." Not saying, but very strongly hinting Qantas. Now, this followed Rex a month or two back saying that Whyalla Council had been deliberately deceptive. David Brooksby took an opportunity to take another swipe at Whyalla, saying Whyalla Council foolishly wanted to curry favour with Qantas. That's a great word, isn't it?
It's great.
Foolishly wanted to curry favour with Qantas and refused to facilitate screened and unscreened departures, although the terminal could easily accommodate this, but instead slugged Rex's passengers with a security surcharge of about $40 to subsidise Qantas operations. Rex has received numerous appeals to reconsider its position on the Whyalla to Adelaide route. Rex feels the pain of the community, as we have been with the constituents through thick and thin for almost 40 years. However, we have come to the conclusion that this current council has lost all credibility, and we regrettably cannot provide our services in this environment.
It's a fantastically Hollywood script. You can imagine them turning to the camera to deliver that speech.
It is, and Rex also did not pass up the opportunity to give Qantas another good kick. David Brooksby said, with regard to Whyalla, after a short circumspect period of good behaviour, Qantas will revert to it as always done when it has a monopoly. The Whyalla community only needs to look at the other ports where Qantas is the sole airline operator, like Lord Howe Island, to be certain what would be its fate ahead: fare gouging, reduced service, and high cancellations.
Look, I think with airport screening, it's a government requirement that all passengers are screened before a flight for aircraft of certain passenger number. So I think screening costs should be absorbed by either A, the airport, or B, the government, as it's a government requirement, and passengers shouldn't be paying for security screening fees, which we do. For most of the flights that we take, there is, if you actually look at the tax breakdown, we pay for this service anyway for what is a government requirement. So I kind of take my hat off to Rex on this one for standing up for the man and kind of giving a screw you to the Whyalla Council. But I guess if people want to complain about it, don't complain to Rex, complain to the council.
Well, Whyalla Council has said... has said that, well, it shouldn't be the responsibility of our ratepayers to subsidise the airport screening. They are saying that it should be on the airlines or the government.
What
Look, I
say,
agree with the government, but sorry to cut you off there, Adam, but if Whyalla Council or if Whyalla Airport has the opportunity to create a special gate that Rex can use that does not require security screening, then set it up. That's the easy solution.
On that perfect note, I think we will wrap up the
Not
show.
yet. I've got some shout outs.
Oh, okay. So, sorry.
I didn't give you a heads up. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Do what you want, mate.
Bit of a surprise segment from Chris here.
He's only been here 2 minutes. He's taken it now. Do what you want, mate.
Hey,
Go on.
Did you get my suggestion earlier? You didn't get back to me.
Which one? Oh, yes. No, I did. I did get that.
Are we going to go ahead with that?
Well, possibly.
I don't think Chris and the Chrisettes would be a good name for the podcast. I'm sorry.
Definitely not. But I did get a lovely message on social media.
So you're getting fan mail, and I get abuse and complaints, and you get nice messages.
Yeah, I get really nice messages. So I want to give 2 shout outs this week. So to Ben J in Melbourne. Ben works for the Qantas Group at Melbourne T1, looking after the 717s, Dash 8s and E-Jets. He is one of the leading hands there. And then he also works at Melbourne Jet Base business jet facility as well, part-time. So Ben reached out on social media, sending me a lovely message saying how much he loves our podcast and what we do and discuss every week. So shout out to Ben J there and your team. Thanks for listening and support. And a special shout out, a dear friend of mine is at home ill this week with COVID for the first time ever. And I feel her pain because COVID is not nice. So my former work wife from Air New Zealand, Liz H., who does listen to our show every week, and she often sends me a message going, I love that point, or I love this, I love that. Liz, I hope you feel better soon, and thanks for your support and listening to the show.
And Liz, if you obviously will be listening, if you've got any, I don't want to use the word dirt, but any bad anecdotes about Chris that you want to let me know about, I will also read that out on the show. That's adam.thorne@momentummedia.com.au.
She'll say I'm a really nice guy and a wonderful work colleague.
I'm sure she will, but when the but comes, that's the bit we're going to take. Anyway, we do need to wrap things up now. Jake, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam.
And Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we will be back on this show, God willing, the same time next week. But for now, from us all, goodbye.